Superman was taken to the hospital, but the needle wouldn't go in. Even the pacemaker wasn't effective. Superman's body of steel is his biggest obstacle. All the doctors are at their wits' end, and this would be the closest Superman would ever come to death. 5 years after Superman left Earth, he returned to a familiar place, but on his first day on the job, he ran into trouble. The shuttle was headed into space when it malfunctioned. It couldn't disconnect from the plane below, and the launch sequence could not be interrupted. The shuttle ignited successfully. The massive thrust of the plane instantly lifted it out of the atmosphere. The primary thrusters are quickly shutting down. By this time, all the passengers in the plane are wearing oxygen masks. However, the shuttle's main thrusters fire immediately, accelerating the plane into space. At this speed, the fighter jets that had come to support it could do nothing, but suddenly, an approaching target appeared on radar at high speed. Superman drags the shuttle and melts the coupler. Then he lifts it upward, and the plane separates. The shuttle flew off the planet without incident, but after the separation, the plane was burned by the rocket. The plane's tail wing has melted, and it can no longer maintain normal flight. It's now falling towards the ground, so Superman went after it and tried to reposition it, but as soon as he did, the entire wing snapped off, and so did the other wing. The plane is falling faster and faster. Right below the plane is a 10,000-person stadium. At this point, some of the spectators notice the falling plane, so Superman accelerates towards the nose of the plane and lifts himself upward to prevent the plane from going straight through the crowd. Crowd cheers as Superman returns, but he wasn't happy because in the 5 years he's been gone, his girlfriend Louise has started a family with an associate editor and has a son. Only his enemy, Lex, has been missing him. Lex has been searching for a way to get to him. After years of investigation, Lex found a high-energy crystal at Superman's address. When it touches water, it grows a continent. When Lex returned to the base, he had his men cut a small amount of powder from the crystal and threw it into the pool in front of him. An invisible electromagnetic storm swept through the city. Then the ground began to tremble. When the tremors subsided, a huge stone pillar ran through the entire room. Lex smiled evilly. This was the power he had dreamed of. The energy released by the crystal almost paralyzed the city's power. That's how planes go out of control. At this point, Superman was unaware of the situation. In the 5 years he's been gone, there have been many criminals committing crimes. He had to deal with them. Superman has been away from Earth for 5 years. The criminals have forgotten how terrible he is. Instead of surrendering, they pulled the trigger. Bullets are like tickles to Superman. The barrels of the guns are burned, but they still can't do any damage. After Superman had finished with the criminals, Superman went back to space to listen to what was happening on Earth. Suddenly, an ear-splitting honk came into his ears. It was a car whose brakes had failed. The driver was barreling down the street. He was about to smash through the glass and run into the passers-by downstairs, but the car suddenly stopped. It was Superman who came to his rescue, but the crisis was actually a trap. Lex was trying to get Superman's attention. Lex had already stolen a stone from the museum. Soon after, Lois began investigating the blackout, but it turns out to be Lex's cruise ship. Thinking they could be used against Superman, Lex put them under house arrest. He even told them all about his plan. Turns out Lex was trying to use the crystals to create a landmass off the coast. The entire United States would sink into the ocean, and Lex would be able to drive up the price of houses to make money. Louise was furious, but there was nothing she could do. After Lex left, Louise avoided the guards. She wrote the coordinates of the cruise ship on a piece of paper and slipped it into the fax machine. But before the coordinates could be transmitted, the guards found them. Without hesitation, the guards grabbed the statue from the table and approached Lois. Turns out he's Superman's son. On the other hand, the newspaper receives half the coordinates. Superman knows it's Louise who's in trouble, so he transforms in the elevator and flew towards the cruise ship. But at that moment, Lex was carrying out his plan. The man puts the alien crystals in the cannonballs. As he pressed the button, the cannonball shot into the distant sea. Upon contact with the water, an enormous amount of energy spreads out. A landmass begins to grow, and soon the entire United States will sink to the bottom of the sea. By now, the inhabitants are feeling the threat. Rocks are falling from the building. Luckily, Superman was able to vaporize the rocks in time, but then a gas line leaks. The burning gas is fast approaching the factory, so Superman went underground and unleashed an absolute freezer to put out the raging heat wave. Superman's presence gave hope to the people in the disaster. On the other hand, the deputy editor had found Lois and the baby, but before they could leave, a pillar of rock came out of the sea and ran through the cruise ship. The ship was soon broken in two, and the hatch was sealed shut. They were all trapped in the cabin. Just as they were drowning, Superman appeared and opened the hatch. After rescuing them, Superman came to Lex's base to seek revenge. However, Lex was not alarmed by Superman's approach because he saw Superman's head was sweating. Superman gets up from the ground and notices that the ground is covered in gravel. Lex had done this on purpose. The gravel had absorbed the crystal's energy and was growing wildly on the land. At this point, Superman felt weak. He had no strength to fight back against Lex. Lex drove a rock straight into his back. Superman struggled to get up from the ground and fell into the ocean. As Lex watched, Lex felt the half-carved stone in his hand. He knew Superman was dead, but then Lois sees Superman in the ocean. He rescues him and pulls the stone out of his body. As they get farther from land, Superman's strength returns. He breaks through the clouds and into the air to absorb the sun's energy. When he returns to full blood, he burns a hole in the ground and rushes in. At this point, Lex thinks he's defeated Superman. Suddenly, the earth begins to shake. It turns out that Superman has lifted the whole land and is heading into space. Lex is stunned by what he sees, but it made him think that this kind of power should be on Earth. Superman flew toward the sky. As everyone watched, the land is still growing wildly, and the carvings from it were digging into his body. Finally, Superman pushes the land toward the sun, but then he fell back to the ground, badly injured. Soon Superman was hospitalized, but nothing could help him. Luckily, the doctors had read the Superman comics. They were able to remove the stone fragments from his body. After a lot of resuscitation, Superman finally regained his vitals. That night, Superman disappeared from the hospital room. After visiting his son, he flew back into space and toured the Earth, ready for his next challenge.